I actually deliberately chose the basement because I thought Redditors would be disappointed if I didn't go with the proverbial Redder in the basement cliches.
I just saw that that you're not feeling 100%. That
Oh, yeah.
this is like
Well,
your flu.
that I don't know, that flu or COVID flu, whatever going around. Yeah, I don't know, but I trust you're going to bring me through this all right.
No, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that.
I
I
got
do
a
want to.
fever.
What's
And
that?
the only prescription is more JJ. So
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I did want to kick off today's show by sort of talking. Like, I feel like your presence online is relatively elusive. You're sort of an
yeah,
enigma at this point, where you've done so much incredible work. You have an incredible website. You've built this following via Reddit. Shout out Reddit. But let's first talk about, like, is this your first appearance, basically, like with fantasy football?
yeah. You brought me out of my basement, I'd say, except I actually deliberately chose the basement because I thought Redditors would be disappointed if I didn't go with the proverbial Redder in the basement cliche.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
but yeah, no, I thought it was a good chance. It's and you sort of sold me on it, saying that basically, hey, we're basically going to nerd out, and for
Yes.
me, that's the safe space. So, pull me out of my shell. Way to
Yeah,
go.
man. Yeah, it's awesome. And I also want so you go by Subvertadown. How did that all come about? Like, even just the
Yeah.
naming convention and you coming up with that name to be as your alias, essentially.
Yeah, I wish it was more exciting in a way, but because when you're choosing your first login name, you got that moment like, oh, okay, I got to get going. So it
Yeah.
was a little bit fast, but sub was a subreddit was a new term to me, and I thought, oh, what would that? And I thought subvert, okay, that I'm trying to sort of disrupt what's going on and
Yeah.
think different and all that. And then down, I guess in a way had two things. One was obviously a down in football, like, so the idea of like you would be trying to trick your way into getting that one extra, not an extra touchdown, but just a down, to
Yeah.
get that marginal advantage. And
Yeah.
I'd had a hobby also 10 years ago of following a lot of rock music history, as it turned out. So I was following, from way back, Duke Ellington and everything, and I was up to System of a Down at the time. I was listening to, so I thought, okay, I don't know, whatever, makes sense. Has nothing to do with it at all, but
Yeah.
basically, and then I kept it. There was this debate about should the website like stay like that, and then we decided, it kind of fits still. It doesn't roll off the tongue, so that's I think the bigger problem.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
It's funny because I got my start, and some people don't like. I mean, I would assume a lot of people don't even realize this, but like, my handle on Twitter is late round QB, and my Reddit handle is late round QB, and the brand that I now run, the business I now run, is late round fantasy football.
Yeah.
And that all started because in 2012 I wrote an ebook called The Late Round Quarterback, because this is back when, like, people were drafting quarterbacks in the first round and second round and stuff like that. And I like, similar to you, I wanted to disrupt, right, and come up with something that was different than what was out there. And I wrote an ebook, and this is when ebooks were not like super ever. I mean, now like, there's ebooks just everywhere, and it's just a different time. But I just used the late round moniker essentially, and just I carried it throughout my career.
Yeah.
And so, like, I can appreciate a little alias. I mean, like, Matthew Berry has talented Mr. like TMR. Like, people might not even realize that that's from something else. That's just not some random letters that are out there.
Exactly.
So I think it's a pretty consistent thing.
Feel free to go with subvert. That's fine. Or, sub, whatever. If you want to go old school, sub-ED or something. I don't know. People don't do that, but whatever it goes. People use a lot of different things on Reddit.
Well, let's talk about Reddit, and let's talk about your sort of journey in doing what you're doing. Again, this is a different platform for you, versus what you've typically been doing with Reddit. So there's going to be people that naturally don't know your backstory, and not to downplay what other people have done who have come on perspectives, but I think yours is the most unique, or one of the more unique, of someone who has been on this show, just because a lot of people are, to be fair, like Andrew Cooper, for instance, who's very active on Reddit. Yeah. He did start his career, Coop did, via Reddit, but I just think your story is really, really interesting. So talk through it and how you got into this thing in the first place.
No, it wasn't. It was definitely not straightforward as I see some others go. I mean, I come from other industries. My background is really diverse across different stuff. So I was just starting to basically involve myself with the forum and read what's going on, and I guess I really started to think about trying my hand at this because I think everyone can associate with this. Things just weren't going good. Like, I was streaming. I was following another, no disrespect. There was another, great guy before me who was doing some DST stuff, was well known, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't working for me. Every week seemed, and I know that's, by the way, there's a percentage of people out there who think the same exactly about me right now. Like they're like, I pick the bust every single week. Like statistically, that has to happen, right? Like there's someone out there. So I think, my thought was that there were a few things I thought were missing and wanted to bring and create. One of them was being a bit transparent about the methodology, like trying to find out what are the assumptions going into this. Everything I do, I would sum up as trying to bring a rational. I think the people who follow my stuff would say they're looking for a rational view of making decisions based on data and stuff. So I think that would mesh a lot with your point of view as well. So, and then, so I wanted to bring that very heavy, data-based, factual, effort. And also I wanted to see, do these people even care about the accuracy? The accuracy is a big thing for me. I spend a lot of time following my own accuracy, comparing it against others and sharing it and saying, and I try to put an effort saying people, this is an exceptionally good year or an exceptionally bad year. To, sort of gauge, don't feel bad if things are not going your way, but, or are things up or down. So I think it was, where should there was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah. The other element I really wanted to bring was strategy. So besides, just having a very good statistically sound model, I can talk more about model,
we will.
And looking at accuracy, but the whole idea of using this for strategy, I wanted to plan future weeks as well. I hated when I would drop a DST or something and come back next week and that one was recommended at the top. I was like, let's involve this. And I think that was one of the eventually big things that I added, was trying to give that look ahead to help people's strategy. And I feel like it's caught on more now. I see a lot more people doing the look ahead thing on Reddit as well. So those are sort of the how it initiated.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously you've made. I mean, your bread and butter has been streaming, right? And it's been with defense and with kicker, etc. And it's funny because I have another podcast, Living the Stream, and that podcast started in 2013 ish. It's sort of become its own niche kind of show where only 15 minutes of the actual hour is talked about fantasy football, and the other X number 45 minutes is me and my co-host Denny Carter talking about just
having fun,
just dad stuff and just random things in life. But I too there's a few things that you just said that I think is just incredibly important. One of the things is transparency, which I think is one of the most important pieces of being a content creator in this space. I understand this urge for especially newcomers in fantasy football as an analyst to not want to be overly transparent and feel like they should only celebrate their victories and not necessarily, talk bad about themselves because but the reality of the situation is that the majority of coherent and kind and normal people out there who are consuming this content understand that you're going to get stuff wrong and that you're not going to be flawless because there's so much variance in this game, right? It's naturally, you're not going to get everything right. And you got to hope that, I remember last year, I don't know if you remember this or if you had this defense high last year, but last year in the championship, the Colts were a great streaming against the Giants, right?
Exactly.
A really good streaming play. And on paper, everything came together. If that had happened, because the Colts, they crapped the bed. But if that had happened in week 6, no one would really care that much because that's just a blip, right? But it happened in the most important week of the fantasy season. And so it was a bigger deal than it otherwise would be. And so for me at least, and I think you're kind of alluding to this too, as an analyst, you're trying to just be as right as you can, and you're trying to guide people in the right direction as frequently as possible. And then the other thing that you mentioned is that there's going to be someone out there who thinks that you suck because they used your advice and naturally it was the wrong advice, right? And it's the same thing that I feel about rankings too. Like going into the season, someone could use the exact same set of rankings and literally just draft off of the rankings in the tiers, right? And it just so happens that the way their draft goes down and where they're positioned in their draft, they end up with Brian Thomas and they end up with these guys who end up busting, even though the rankings were really great for somebody else. And you're just hoping, again, as an analyst, that your rankings are helping far more people than they're hurting people, right? In the end. And I'm assuming that that's kind of like what your general philosophy is as well. And so you started on Reddit, you started doing all of this, streaming work, and you were writing, you were doing write-ups and such. And then you've moved to other platforms. What has that been like? And what have you done there?
Yeah, right. Well, that only came after a bit of evolution. To your point, my very first year was not a good one. I honestly just assumed this was going to be quite easy and that I would be able to deliver a, democratized, very simple equation that everyone could just use. And hey, guys, look, here's the new way. And that didn't happen. So there was an evolution of a lot of work in revising the model. It was after about a year and a half that I think that things really started to click, and it was because I had introduced the correct, proper way of doing actual predictive modeling, which I was hoping it wouldn't have to go that far initially, but it was also a fun journey. So anyway, then it just, the journey. I guess what happened was the reason I eventually switched, the next thing would have been Patreon, actually, that I went to after Reddit. And that was actually because after a few years, things got really intense. There were a lot of demands on the model. It had not only evolved, I think people really enjoyed the journey. That's what I like to share is like, hey, these are the improvements I made. When I do the whole thing about accuracy improvements is I focus on here's what I think I got wrong, and next time I'm going to improve that. So it had been through all that, but there was so much. I was so busy because, and Reddit is not the best platform for all the sharing. Yeah. Like I would make a post on Tuesday and for DSTs, and I would end up like editing it 3 times a day or something, because the Vegas lines would change or somebody would say, hey, now it looks like there's snow or something. And what do you do now about this injury? Oh, this quarterback's out. And so it's like, it became like this really exhausting. It consumed a lot of effort to like, it's not, I think that's one thing you could also identify with. It's not just like a model, like this simple thing that you put out in the world and it just like runs itself. Yes. This was what I used to think of it like, it's constant maintenance. And I think people also, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but I think
this is great.
People didn't realize in the background that like, as the season was going on, I was revising the model, and it wasn't, not because it was bad. I was adding new things to it. I was looking at like, I was studying like in the past, like, hey, maybe the mid-season has different drivers and predictive factors. And let's look, so I was kind of doing all these like extra studies to sort of increase the accuracy. But anyway, this sharing of it and the like constant updating became quite a lot. So I eventually started putting things out on, actually I was at some point sharing a Google Sheets or some like PDF output or something. Yeah. So that people, that eventually led over to Patreon as well. As you alluded to, I'd done a lot of studies, like, and I can just mention the thing I really enjoy doing actually is not the rankings itself. That's like a headache that kind of invites a lot of scrutiny.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Yeah. And it's so much effort, it's not just for me. I really liked these studies. I just did one yesterday that was about, should you pair your DST against another player you have if they're opposing teams? So, diving into all that, like super interesting stuff, but people wanted the rankings. But anyway, I needed a place to sort of catalog all these studies. I felt like Reddit was quite terrible for like being an archive. Like there was no place to like, so I tried to make posts that like summarized where they were. So anyway, Patreon became a thing. I originally also, yeah, it got a bit overburdened, and I started. Some people think like, oh, he was going there to try to just to earn money or something like that, and that wasn't the story about it really. I kind of came to a point where it was so much work, and the feedback I was getting was not always positive. So I said, okay, either I can, stop. I've like come as far as I can. The model's good. It's great. Things are working. It's got predictive power. Um, or I should find a way to continue and make it sustainable. And I had this idea maybe of a bit of a Robin Hood, thing where like my biggest supporters would probably say, yeah, I'm really into that stuff and the studies and the week's look ahead and all that. I'll subscribe or something. And that was just, it was also, I guess, mixed with the idea of I like to measure, as by nature, like, is this something that's actually people like appreciate? So eventually it moved a lot of the stuff to Patreon for that reason. Patreon itself was not ideal, and that's
going through that right now too. I feel that.
Yeah. I mean, I had, first of all, with the subscribers, there was this thing where like you can pause the payments each month, but like, so in the off season, I wanted to make sure people weren't paying, and I was just charging like, what was it, $1 a month for the lowest? It was like, it was like nothing, right? Or maybe $3. There was a $7, whatever. But I had to like remember each month to pause it. And also just the whole thing about the functionality of it. Like, if you contrast it now, anyone who uses the website see that like you can just sort by any column. You can hover over here. You can see the opponent by hovering your mouse. You can see all these like extra bar graphs and distributions, ranges, and all that. Like, and that basically could never happen with Patreon. But the way it happened, I was lucky enough that I was reached out to by a subscriber, actually, or a fan, who said, hey, I see some potential in this. Like, I think that you could really elevate the experience people have from following this stuff by putting it on a website. And of course, you never know who you're going to meet on the internet. Like, it can go any which way, but fantastic guy. I'm so proud of the website right now and the work he's done on it to make it very, clean, simple, and delivering all the stuff that's to the point. So, so eventually it was basically closing down Patreon that was one of the reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, the website's amazing. It's great. And you have a lot of tools on that site. Can you talk through some of that's obviously something that you can't, do on a site like Patreon, where you're just basically like uploading assets. That's essentially what I'm doing on Patreon, with rankings and stuff like that. But what are some of the tools that you're offering to help fantasy managers out?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the first one, of course, is the look ahead. I mean, that I mentioned before, the strategic idea of viewing weeks ahead, which is one of the trickier parts of the things that I model, actually, because it means that I need to, in simple terms, I basically need to model future game scores as well. I need to sort of be as good as bookies and Vegas at predicting what that next game will be. So, so that's definitely the major aspect. Then there's, the most common question that I always got, and this is what I really wanted to impart to people, was why is that ranking high? Why are the Seahawks low this week or something, or whatever it is? And to be able to explain that, like, I could just give away the model and say, oh yeah, it's 2.7 times the passing yards per attempt, and but that's not useful. And by the way, it was changing every year, the actual with updates. So I think one of the really useful things I wanted to bring to people is interpret the model and give the key reasons what's making this player higher or lower. I also include a big thing for me, like you mentioned, the variance. And to me, that is I've spent a lot of time. And by the way, I think I have 20 articles on my website about, there's a category called expectations. Just to tell people what's normal, what to expect, what, things are if you 6 points less than predicted, is that reasonable or out of the ordinary? So I have, risk. I actually model the risk, the upside downside, so people can get a feeling if it's a safe bet or not. And I think one of the ones that I hope people are using, because it really gets to that point, is this one I created that does similar historical matches. So we make these histograms, and it's a separately developed model, actually different from the normal one, where I went in and tried to search through history. So it's constantly updating each time there's any little change, and it searches through the last 15 years of games and tries to pick out which one is closest based on. I mean, I didn't create what is similar. The
Sure.
computer decides what makes it a similar match. Anyway, the point of that is it actually will display the distribution in the past of how this game has gone. So you can easily see that, hey, this game might be leaning, they might be skewed towards lower value, but with some upside. Or you can see that actually there was like a plus or minus 8-point range for that particular scenario. And I hope that is adding value for people. I think it really is, because a lot of people are looking for that intuition of what is normal, and what can I really expect from these rankings.
Yeah, and look, you alluded to this earlier in saying that a lot of people just want rankings, right? They just want to have that answer and they want to use that. But what I've found and discovered, and I think that like if you were to go and you would see what analysts are talking about on like Twitter, or even on like from an analyst perspective, a lot of analysts would say that some of the deep dives that other analysts do are not necessary, because people just want, at the end of the day, they just want these rankings. And I have a very strong disagreement with that, because I think that, and not only that, I think my audience in general would just be the perfect example, and your audience on Reddit and such would be a perfect example of this. But this game that we're playing right now, people are not into this hobby simply because they only want to win, right? This is an outlet for people to learn different things, to really dive in and analyze something that is separate from their day job and separate from their everyday life. And
you are so right. Yeah.
This is an ability for them for anyone, right? Like you and I started the same way, where we're just like, we like to dive deep into these topics and dig into it and analyze it. Because yes, the end goal is that we want to be better in fantasy football. We want to win. But there is such an appetite out there that people have to really dig in and try to understand this game on a deeper level. And that's why, like, I think the hardest part is finding that balance of simply providing rankings without any sort of backbone and just saying like, here, have them, like once you've established yourself as someone who, has a process and can do this, you can say, here's my rankings, just trust me. But that just doesn't do it for me. Like I think that we need to always and constantly be providing that backbone, because that's not only fair to customers and to people who are consuming our content, but I think people care. And what you're alluding and what you're saying here is that you're showing these histograms and you're showing these charts and such to allow people to dig in themselves and to still to not just take what you're saying at face value all the time, and to dig into it themselves too.
That's exactly right. And I think I should have mentioned earlier, I mean, the whole point for wanting like this rational basis, it increases people's enjoyment of the game. They like feel like they actually understand and know what space they're operating in.
Right.
And that can go two ways. That can be like, I want to trust the model, so I know that this player higher is the one I should choose, which is a little too simple. Or like, I want to know that I don't need to worry quite so much.
Yes.
That's a big point for me. Like I've got questions before, like, why do you have, I'm just going to say Boswell because he got the most attention this year. Why do you have him like number 9 or something? And it's like, well, okay, he's number 9, but like there's a 0.2 difference between him and like the number 4 or number 3. Like it's one tier, you could say, but you need that projection. You need that ability to know like, okay, what actually do I need to sweat it? Can I?
Yes.
And I think to me, it's about letting people have fun. Like you have a lot of freedom. If there is 1.5 points difference, then more than that, then okay, maybe start to think like you could make a better choice.
Yeah, be more.
But you've got a lot of flexibility to make it your game, to make your choices, the ones you enjoy. I try to stress that quite frequently. People say like, oh, just got this feeling about McPherson this week. And, but I see he's like in your ranks, and I'm just like, the difference is like 2 points. Let's say, it's the difference between, let's say, I don't know, like 9 points and 7 in the projection. Like if you're going to feel way worse if you listen to this guy here, like just tell you, and it didn't, go right for you.
Right.
Then if it was a choice you owned,
Right.
And then, okay, so what, maybe, next time I could do different, but at least it was your own choice. So I think a lot of the people that follow my stuff and your stuff are looking for that kind of experience.
Yeah, and you mentioned like your own choice, like yes, it's gonna, you might, be really pissed off whenever things don't go your way after you made that choice, and maybe some people out there just want to blame the fantasy analyst. And okay, like we've heard that plenty. But also celebrating the wins is so important whenever you're the one who made, like when people come to me at the end of the season, they're like, thank you so much. You got me a championship. I didn't get you a championship.
Yeah.
You managed your roster. You did all of that. I hopefully guided you in the right direction. But I think there's no better example of what you were referring to with like projections and like just in tiers than wide receiver this year in fantasy football. There's like 8 good wide receivers, and then there's just a bunch of them, and there's so much volatility this year in particular at the position, and you don't feel great about them. And then, you publish rankings, or I'll publish rankings in a given week, and someone might say, why is this player 12 spots ahead of this player? But realistically, there's really not much of a difference in terms of projection between those guys. It's just, you see, This is and I'm curious if you agree with this. This is where I have always had issues with rankings, is that they're so linear naturally, right? It's just 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And so our brains, when we look at rankings, we're like, oh, this 1 is 1 away from 2, that 2 is 1 away from 3. And this is why I try to tier all of my rankings. But realistically, 1 to 4 could be light years ahead of 5 to 8, in the way that the rankings are set. And I think just naturally, like the way people consume things, and this is my biggest issue with like just anything in the fantasy space, and why I've never been one to submit anything to Fantasy Pros and such, because number one, I don't want my content to just be there. I want to own my content. But number two, like, I don't think that's necessarily like the way that people need to consume this content, like I think it's too linear in nature.
Yeah, right. It is a problem. And tiers are a problem too sometimes, because you don't know the drop off between like the different ones, and it's a simplification. So that's why, I mean, everything I do defaults to point projections somehow, so that you can actually see. And I got the color gradient as my classic thing since 8 years, so you can also get a bit of a visualization of that. So no, that's absolutely right. I used to study like how to get people to understand in terms of rankings as well. I've heard you talk about this before on the show. Like, just because you predict the number 1 spot for the week, you definitely don't expect that person to be the number 1.
Yeah, exactly.
And in my case, I remember finding that, like, for DST, whenever I have it number 1, the most likely outcome is number 10.
Yeah.
Which sounds pretty bad, but you're sort of ignoring that someone's going to have a surprise boom, and maybe it doesn't go as well. Like, there's this huge, and that's not because the rankings are bad, but like everyone else I look at is at least that, or if not a little worse when I make comparisons. So it's like, it's just this like constant, and that's what people need to understand, is like, you couldn't have really done any better, just the way the randomness and the scatter works out.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar when people will talk about if a player busted or not in a given season, and they're like, well, I drafted this guy at RB7 and he finished as RB9. And I'm like, that's a great season for the RB7. Like, if you're getting that kind of production from the RB7, that's why I always base everything off of ADP expectation, right? So just based on how many points we'd expect a player to score at their particular ADP versus how players historically have scored at that ADP. And so if the RB7 typically scores, I don't know, 14 and a half PPR points per game, or whatever that number would be, and then that player who you drafted there scored 15 PPR points per game, then that player actually even if he's the RB9 or the RB10, he actually outperformed that ADP expectation. And he was actually a good pick, not a bad pick. And so that to me, again, going more based on the numerical value as opposed to just the ranking value, can go a really long way, not only in the way that we analyze this game, but in the way that people react, like you're saying, to this game. Like, this guy was a horrible pick because he finished as, like he was 3 spots below where we drafted him. It's like, okay, but look at what's going on around him. Like, everyone else also didn't perform, and that's just the way that fantasy football goes. But I do want to talk about these predictive models. Let's get a little bit nerdier with this
even more. Okay.
Yeah. Even more nerdy.
You say so, but it wasn't my decision. So go for it.
So you have these models with like streaming defenses, and honestly, the way that I'll talk about my process really quick, just because I think it'll help at least like show the discrepancy between how I approach things to how you approach things. Mm-hmm. My weekly process with ranking is that I have a very baseline projection that I'll run for every player. But as you noted, it is a lot of work. Like, it's not a button that you click and then all of a sudden everything is just good for you for the rest of the week, right? Like when it comes to projections and stuff, there's an insane amount of maintenance. The best
Tuesdays are crazy. Tuesdays are crazy. Wild.
Yeah. They're nuts.
Work up all the data. Yeah.
And the best projectors in the space, like if you go to and establish the run, for instance, some of the sharpest people in DFS and best ball and season long, and they have people that are working on projections that are constantly fixing projections, and they're having literal discussions about one single player's target share to that level of detail. And I'm one dude who's doing this, and I'm obviously creating all this other content. So what I found as my best practice for being able to get as much done as I can get done is to have a baseline projection that I'll run each week at the beginning of the week. I don't really touch the projections again the rest of the week. It's more so a subjective, like, look at then I'll dig in more into individual matchups and stuff for wide receivers, like slot roles versus out wide roles, and see, which players just seem to have better matchups based on some of the more qualitative things, just like knowing ball and like seeing what I'm seeing, while I'm watching games and stuff like that. So I use the projections as a baseline, but the difference between what I'm doing and what you're doing is that your projections are really guiding how you're ranking these guys. And so I'm very curious as to what's going into that modeling for all these different positions. So let's start with defensive streaming. What are some of the big inputs that you're looking at when you are with your model and when you are ranking these defenses each week?
I mean, the first, I'll actually open something up here because why not? But I mean, first of all, the way I run it is that I don't choose. I let the computer. I basically program my own AI. I was doing AI classes at the end of the 90s, and it was something I sort of pulled back, wanted to get back into. So I made algorithms that sort of train based on and find which inputs are actually most valid. So at some point, hold on, I'm just going to open this up here. Okay, so maybe a first thing to clarify, I don't know if you deal with this actually, but one question is always like, what is an average, like the average number of sacks that a team has, or interceptions, or whatever. And I don't talk about this one much because it's so boring for people, but I spend an enormous amount of time every off season. I don't, this goes all year for me, right? Like January hits, I'm going to be like revising this module. And what it does is, first of all, figure out for each parameter, like what is the best average? Should you use the last 5 weeks of interceptions or rushing yards, or the last 10 weeks? And should you look at trends, or is it, so it's sort of trained to learn on that data to predict or to optimize what correlates with a future result as well. So that's like the first thing that goes into it. Then I have, I don't know if anyone puts that much effort into like creating an average. I'd actually be really curious how others do it, but that's my way of doing it. It's very involved. And then when it comes to the models, so first of all, maybe I should point out, so I have 3 DST models, right? Because I was always surprised there hasn't been another real like ESPN DST rankings out there, because the decisions are very different from the normal Yahoo Sleeper, the one that Fantasy Pros measures against with the yards allowed. So I have
got it.
Different models for that, and also this one that became popular, You Deserve Better Defensive Scoring. So the models will be a bit different. Oh yeah, okay, I'm looking at it now, but it's not that. I actually switched in the last year to actually first predicting sacks and interceptions and yards allowed, like all of the individual components, and then combining them. That was just something I learned worked better. It doesn't mean that it has to be that way, but it gave better predictions. So then I need to look at all of those. But it's things like okay. So here we go. Interceptions is based on it's actually more heavily weighted to defensive interceptions, a little bit less towards the opponent, the quarterback thrown interceptions, just slightly. And how many pass first downs they have and completions. It's tied to Vegas. So in this case, interceptions is related to the spread.
Yeah.
The spread for Vegas. I don't think that's a big surprise.
Yeah.
And then there's this small little nudge from Monday games having slightly more, but so it's stuff like that. And, weather would be included as well.
Yeah. Indoor, outdoor, I'm assuming there's
splits. Yeah. All of that. So yeah, I don't know if I can give anything too like elucidating because it's really hard. Like it's not interesting to hear about like what is the equation.
But I think it is. I think it's good for people to hear the amount of detail that goes into that kind of thing because, I think that there's like I don't know if you like how you feel about this, but I do a lot of prospect modeling, right? So one of like my big, if you were to say what is like the big model that you run and do, it would be the ZAP model, the Zach Recent Adjusted Prospect model that I do. That's just based on incoming running back, wide receiver. The tight end model is not bad, but it's not amazing. I haven't put as much effort into the tight end one as I have. It's just harder because the data set's not as large, right? As the running back and wide receiver one. But I've found through, and like you said, like you started and then you got into it. And then like the first year you were manipulating even more than you do now, just because you saw, it's the same thing with me. Like you're learning constantly as you're adding and you're altering and changing things. And, I've gotten feedback before with the ZAP model where every year in January, most of my January is spent, or a lot of my January is spent manipulating the model and just kind of like testing other metrics that I haven't tested before and just seeing if there's anything to make it more predictive than it's been. And sometimes it turns people off because they've gotten results in the past where hopefully it's been good, but now they're saying, oh, well, this result in the past, this player's prospect score was a 95 and now it's a 97. And because you changed some inputs and it changed, it's like, yeah, but don't you want me to be more accurate? Like that's like that's my, but then,
that was a common thing on Reddit for a while. People, why did your rankings change? It's so frustrating that like, it was, suddenly there came snow in the weather report. Like, what do you want? Bad rankings?
Right. Exactly.
But I think these inputs actually are extremely interesting. And I try to share, like I did a couple posts earlier this year on missed kicks, for example.
Yeah.
And to try to show that like predicting future missed kicks isn't just by looking at the kicker's accuracy. It's based on all these other things, spread, maybe fumble recoveries and the weather, if there's wind. Like there are a lot of reasons that contribute to a missed kick besides just previous missed kicks.
Yeah.
I'm looking at fumble recoveries here, and it's got stuff like playoff chances as a part of it, or the pace of game and stuff like that. And I wanted to mention, there was one other thing. I'm just looking at one out of the corner of my eye here, but the way I have it set up to work, to give a little bit of extra insight to the model, I actually have differentiated models for high Vegas implied scores and low Vegas implied scores, and also mid or whole range. So I actually have, and they're totally different parameters. Like what predicts a good DST score if their opponent is expected to score high has different inputs. Like I forget which one. In one of them, interceptions isn't important, and the other one, sacks isn't as important. Like it actually makes like a difference.
But that makes sense. More predictive. That's intuitive, right? Yeah. Like because if you're in a low Vegas game, like it's likely going to be a little bit more ground heavy, or it's not. Whereas, and I do think that from a defense, and I want to hear your thoughts on this definitely, because like last week, for instance, I remember I had the Rams ranked relatively high against Arizona. And, and I had some feedback like, oh, Arizona, is playing well offensively. And I don't know how much I trust, whatever the case may be. But I think that there's like this misunderstanding a little bit by the everyday fantasy manager that you don't just want to chase low point totals for the opposing team because where we score points defensively is via dropbacks, right? Like we want, because you get a sack, you can get an interception. There's going to be obviously sack fumbles, and that's a huge, it can be a huge play. And most of those plays are going to be, there's really not that big of a differential when you unless you're getting like a shutout or something in most platforms with like allowing 14 points versus 27 points. It's not going to be as dramatic as some of the turnover stuff would be. Is that one of the key reasons that you would then have the two separated models of like high totals and low totals?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also, by the way, for different phases of the season. So different inputs for the last, now we're in playoffs. So it's heavily weighted towards even a different set, depending on, other things, like playoff chances and the like as well. So yeah, exactly. It's just letting really, honestly, it's letting the computer explore that space and testing theories. I really liked what you said about the way you update your models in the off season, Zap model, because that's how I think of it. This isn't just like, I kind of don't even like the word model sometimes, because it just sort of implies somebody like puts some like equations together or something. In a way it is, but every update is like a small study. It's like it's a small bit of research to test whether something is impactful or not. And so I wish I could. I mean, I have so much more to say if people had the patience and time to listen about what interesting factors actually drive this one or that one. But that's how it is. It's a bunch of micro studies.
Yeah. So you also do kicker models, and the funny thing about the kicker stuff is, number one, kickers are obviously they're a hot topic every year in fantasy, where some leagues, a lot of managers just don't want them in the game, and some managers do. I find it just funny because last summer or 2 summers ago, I told people on the late round Discord that I was going to build a kicker model, just because I would keep getting kicker questions. I don't do kicker rankings at all. Like, I just don't. Like, it's just never been part of like what I offer. And I semi joked that I was going to build a kicker model, and then I started messing around with it a little. I finally had some data that I got and stuff with kickers, and I started looking into it, and I'm like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this right now. So I got to ask you, with the kicker model, like, what are some of the big inputs that you definitely, feel like are important? But then number two, is it a harder thing to model than defensive streaming?
Right. Defenses? No, I was jeered for even suggesting I would try to make a kicker model originally. Back if we go 8 years ago, it was like, why would you subject yourself to that? Exactly. But it's been it's the most frustrating one to do. But it also brings so much more learning and insight, I think, into what actually drives it. So I think for that reason, it's always the curiosity factor is what sort of compels more investigation. But it is definitely very difficult. Like, so I think. So first of all, like, my DST models, I'm very happy with. I keep I think they have reached I don't have, when I do my accuracy reviews, I would always have years where I would say, hey, looks like I'm like third this year or whatever, I like admitting the faults. At this point, it's just been like week after week. It's just, and unfortunately, it's not like you say celebrating the wins. I'm tangent now, but my problem is that sometimes the real benefit of the model is downgrading the ones that actually are busts, and people don't see that, because like there were some weeks where I don't know, everyone else had the Lions high and my model, or Broncos or something, mine had them a lot lower, but nobody was like, oh, thank you for not telling me to do that. Anyway, so DST model I feel great about. Quarterback model is just like on fire. I'm so happy with it. The kicker model is in constant development, and I think it's going to probably be the only one that I really do some other updates on. So first of all, like last year, it did really well. There was a guy on Fantasy submitted to Fantasy Pros my kicker rankings, and they came number 2 last year.
Oh, nice.
Some weeks they weren't submitted, so there were some discrepancies. But I felt very good about it. But the game is changing a lot, and that has disturbed my kicker models. So, for example, I don't know, if you go back 6 years ago, we had the emergence of some of the air raid strategies having impact in the NFL. And that had that was a little harder to predict. There was a bit less field goals from that. But the big one, the way I started here, a lot of you asked about Reddit before, a lot of my earlier kicker rankings were going fantastic. And I mean, for 2019, 20, they were it was picking out kickers that you wouldn't normally expect, and they were delivering. But the times change. And one of the things that changed, especially in 21, 22, was this prevalence of fourth downs.
Yes.
And the
Yeah.
increased, I guess some clever analysts came up with the idea, so much for them. But to encourage that they should go for more fourth downs, and they did, and that was disturbing a lot of the kicker ranks. So I had to update my model for that. And the more recent one, I would say, is actually this about with the K ball. Yeah, I guess if
Oh
you're
yeah.
not
Yeah.
be familiar, but just the fact
Yep.
that now kickers can sort of choose which ball they will use for their kick, so they're familiar with it, and they're going for longer kicks. It's exciting also because we're seeing many more long kicks, which is making the position more exciting. But I had a tough time. So my model's been doing great this year, except for two specific weeks, week 3 and 5, where it was like you could just turn that ranking upside down,
Yeah.
and it was just awful. This is actually a good example of something where I see a bad result, I totally admit it, and then dig into the reasons why. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like, from what I can see, that a lot more teams were trying out this idea, like, hey, maybe my kicker can do
Interesting.
this too.
Yeah.
And there were all these teams, like a quarter of the league, that in week 1, 2, 3, those kicks from 50 yards and longer were like more than double the historical amount. It slowed down after week 7, so now we're like back to normal. But it was like the first month was just full of really long kicks, and the model had been trained to pick up on that and say, oh, this, the way it had learned from the past. In the past, you could trust that if there were some long kicks, that would make a good kicker choice for the next few weeks.
Yeah.
But it turned out like the Bills, Eagles, Giants, Ravens, Rams, Cardinals, Chiefs, like all these teams had a lot of long kicks early and then none for still, maybe they've had maybe 2 or 3 of those since then, but they just stopped. And that basically caused these week 3 and 5 rankings to say, hey, we want those kickers, but actually they weren't doing that anymore.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing an evolution of the game now where they need to decide at that, midfield range, am I going to go for a fourth down or am I going to take the long kick? And they're working through that strategy, and that, so that's one of the challenges with recently with the kicker modeling.
I was going to say, I mean, NFL trends, it has to be so difficult right now for so many reasons. Number one, you have the fourth down stuff. And I do want to say, have you, when it comes to, and I'll get to the other thing that I want to talk about here in a second too, but when it comes to the fourth down stuff, have you gotten as granular as looking at coaching data and seeing how frequently the individual coach might be going for fourth down? Or is that something where you're just kind of looking at general team for that season and how things are trending with their fourth down aggressiveness?
Yes, it's the second one. I would like to get more granularity and actually dig in. I haven't integrated where on the field position are the fourth down, and I think that's something I would really like to add into it as well.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger issue has become these longer kicks, and it works in a little bit if they go. So there's actually, if I can mention one other kind of interesting, to me, it's a really interesting fact there, because if you see all these long kicks, you think, oh, aren't NFL scores increasing then? We have if we're getting more field goals, aren't game score? And I dug into it, and really it's been so low. Even if it doubled, it would add basically half a point per game, on average, with the amount of increased long kicks. And we've seen that fluctuation before. The average score can go, up 1 or 2 points historically. I mean, that's reasonable. But I was also looking into has anything decreased, and actually it has. It turns out that the near-term kicks are have decreased the last couple of years at the same time. So we used to be able to sort of trust that there would be this sort of same ratio of short kicks and long kicks. And by the way, this is the exciting part to me, because there's been this narrative for a while that people say, well, you want to pick a kicker who has a team that can get down the field and then stalls in the red zone. Mm-hmm. That's been the historical narrative. And actually now it's going away from that. I mean, and that was true for some teams. It was always a little dodgy, if other people found this too, but basically, there wasn't a huge difference between red zone success and, drive success rate, looking upfield as well. But I think what we're seeing is more of the fourth downs closer to the red zone as well. So you're seeing fewer of those short kicks.
Yeah, and I think to not to interrupt, but I think that was the other thing that I was going to bring up was that I think a lot of that has to do with the kickoff rules, where field position is so different now, right?
Yeah.
Starting field, like why would you punt at this point or kick a field goal at this point and have because the expected points on a given drive is going to just look different based on where that drive is actually starting, and so to what you were saying though about like the shorter kicks not happening as frequently because teams are then going to be more aggressive and say, no, we're just going to go for it on 4th and 3 because we have good, but we'll give them bad field position if we miss this. And I think there's a lot of things that are merging here. It's like on one end, it's definitely the kickoff rules and, all that. But then on the other end, it's also what you noted, there's analysts and people who have done analytics that have said, this is when you should be going for it here more frequently. And so it's like this merging of like, just progressiveness in the way that coaches are going to call those plays just based on data, but also the rules in the NFL. But, you said, we used to very like shorthand wise with a kicker. Okay.
Yeah.
We would say we want kickers in high implied team total teams or on those types of teams that they're probably favorites, like in a good spot, or at least like you don't want a negative game script because then they'd be going for it a lot. Right. And then, you want them to be like maybe not as great in the red zone. Is there like a shorthand if you were to just dumb it down like a couple bullet points or no? The answer could be no. I'm not trying to, I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
But is there like a shorthand of like a couple of things that, this year, rest of season, we got 3 weeks left. I mean, maybe I'm selfishly saying this too, because I have a couple kicker leagues that are still going on, but is there like a shorthand of like what we should be looking for in a kicker and making that decision?
I'm going to say no. I don't think you can do that, but that's also part of what keeps it really interesting. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why a kicker could end up with more opportunities, and it doesn't just depend. It depends on does the team pass more than run or not, and I mean the whole dynamics of the team. And this was my initial goal. The reason I was interested in kickers was really to bring in this idea of like the whole team interaction and dynamics and dependencies, like not just simple. And maybe there was a time where you could simplify it a bit. I have shared, my I called it actually the simple equation, where just like you said, you can look at the implied total and the spread. The spread matters as well, and make an estimate for what the kicker will score, and that works reasonably well. But one of the tools I didn't mention that I've added is this stalling curve that I have for kickers as well, where I simulate the likely end of a field position at the end of each drive, and that's something else that I model. So this actually has created. This year I was releasing the first decimal scoring for kicker. So there's a model for that, and it's based on this idea of looking at where the drive stops at the 30-yard kicks, 40-yard kicks, and so on. And each one of those has a different driver, which is really, I posted about this before. So I'm looking through here. I feel like I can pull out a good example here. So, the 30-yard line depends a lot on those 30+ yard kicks, depends on red zone efficiency, and if the opponent is punting. The 20-yard plus depends on the spread. So as you actually get more upfield, it's less dependent on different Vegas inputs and the like.
Interesting.
Divisional games, missed points, pace of game. So I think it's too complicated, the narrative, and that's the only way actually to get an edge on the kicker modeling, and that's why it works, is to sort of accept like this could go a lot of different ways, but the best guess we have is to actually look at these sort of discrete
the micro things,
segments, and then combine them together.
You've done a lot of interesting studies. I want to touch on a couple of them, a few of them that you can maybe talk through. I do want. Let's just start with a very high level one, based on the fact that we're talking about streaming. I've done a podcast about streaming for 13 years now. Clearly, we think streaming can be effective, but is it officially better to stream at those three, we'll say defense, quarterback, and kicker versus, going with one of those positions maybe when you're drafting?
Right. No, these are some of the ones I like to do because that was a question sometimes. Like,
Oh yeah.
you talk about the late round when it was an early round quarterback, and that was a philosophy: get a good defense that got basically 10, 15 years ago overturned the idea and say no, you actually can
Yeah.
stream. So that's something that I definitely like to simulate and model and figure out also at which point it doesn't make sense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So the DST is clearly like you should stream.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Kickers is a difficult one. I mean, it changes again with the different years, but in general, the conclusion is that kicker streaming can work better.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've recently been working on a new analysis. I haven't published this one yet. That is reconsidering the idea that maybe at some point you can hold your kicker. Maybe like it takes halfway through the season maybe to figure out which teams have a propensity for kicking, and they're gonna kick, and it changes, right? Because Boswell, people have loved him, especially last year and a bit this, like he's been around a decade, and it wasn't like he was always so teams change, their kicking opportunities change. And halfway through the season maybe you can learn, and so I've been looking at, does it at some point make sense to look ahead and hold on to the kicker? So, simulating that your league mates could pick them up, for example, and protect against that. And that seems to have some validity, I think. So I've given, posts about holding recommendations.
Interesting.
Quarterback is really interesting.
It's very, I'm very curious to hear what you say about this.
The way I look at this one is I do the same thing. So I simulate like, if your league is sort of holding their quarterbacks and you're the one trying to stream, and they're always just grabbing like the best scoring quarterback, like maybe they give it a first month. That's normally what seems to be the best strategy. Like you try out 4 weeks, and then I think this fits in real life too. Then you see your league mates kind of pick up, hey, that guy's scoring a lot, and they'll just pick up the top scoring quarterback. So anyway, I simulated this. And what I look for is sort of what's the cut, like how many quarterbacks does your league need to own before it becomes a bad idea, right? And it's kind of a toss up here. I think it depends how big your league is.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in a 12 plus team league, and your league's everyone's holding 2 quarterbacks, then you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? Yeah. So it gets tough. But for smaller leagues, you can consider, even if everyone holds 2 quarterbacks, there's still some good wiggle room that you can still optimize and stream your quarterback. So that's the way I try to plot it, and communicate that it depends on your league settings. Also, if you have a league where everyone's holding 3 quarterbacks or whatever, that's a different scenario.
Yeah, I also think the quarterback stuff is very interesting because, unlike, I mean, I would assume, it's not like I've dug into the kicker stuff, but I would assume that there are very few kickers where over a 5-year period, maybe Brandon Aubrey is going to become that guy, but, very rarely are there guys who are just like, we're going to get kicker 1 production from this guy this season. And we know that from a predictability standpoint going into the year. Whereas at quarterback, what we've seen since since Lamar Jackson's first MVP season, I always kind of reference that point because I think the fantasy football market switched in the way that they view mobility at the quarterback position and the importance of rushing at the quarterback position. And so since then, we've seen the ADPs, the average draft position of these high-end quarterbacks that are mobile, and these unicorns who are dual threat, the Josh Allens, Lamar Jacksons, the Jalen Hurts of the world, who were able to do, and I know I say Jalen Hurts after he's coming off the game that he came off of, but those guys are now being pushed up in ADP, which makes it very difficult for those players to then be available on the waiver wire for us to find or for us to get late. And there's always going to be Drake May was a pretty easy low-hanging fruit late round quarterback target this year, and this is not even me saying in hindsight. You guys can listen to all the shows in the off season where I talked about him, but Jaden Daniels last year, where it's like, okay, he's probably gonna have some mobility, we can throw that dart. But the thing that I found, because we track our quarterback picks on Living the Stream, and when I look at what we did from 2013 when we started tracking, or maybe we started tracking in like 2015, through about 2019, 2020, we were consistently QB5, QB6 in points per game with our streaming picks. And for the record, our streaming picks are based on, low percentage rostered, quarterbacks. And we don't have the benefit of finding a guy and just using him for the rest of the season if he's a great
Right.
quarterback starter, right? So we're only looking at free agency. So we're constantly and consistently mid QB1. And then all of a sudden, when people started to the market started to realize that these Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson players are unicorns, and more of those unicorns came to be within the fantasy space. Now we're streaming like QB 11 in points per game. It's just not as easy to find those guys, off the waiver wire, because the market itself has become a lot more in tune with what works at the quarterback position.
Yeah, that's right. No, so I in my analysis, I did a quarterback streaming post, was it like around week 6 this year, looking at this, and I also look at the trends. There are some years where it's just impossible, and then it's changing. It's as always. So the best you can do is try to find out what is typical, and is there a trend? Is it actually moving in this direction or not?
Yeah. So another question, another study that you've done, and I get this question probably a dozen times a year, is should you pair your quarterback with his kicker in the same fantasy lineup?
Yeah, that was one I was really proud to sort of elucidate, because there were there was not a lot, but some articles saying that yes, you should do that because you decrease your risk. And the idea there was that you would, if your quarterback didn't throw a touchdown, then your kicker would be in position to get a field goal. So you would kind of get this offsetting effect. And my finding was, that's not true. That generally is not true, because, if you sort of consider the situations, your quarterback scores high, quarterback scores low, kicker scores high, it's actually more likely you're in one of the other quadrants. Like if the game is going well, then your quarterback is going to score high and your kicker will get opportunities, and vice versa. If they're doing worse, then they tend to actually move together. That was a surprise as well.
That's definitely a surprise, because you feel like there's a finite number of drives in a game, right? Yeah. And scoring opportunities, but you're saying that there is a favorable correlation between quarterback scoring well and kicker scoring well.
Yeah, if you want to sort of, it's not stacking, so to speak, but if you want to pair them, if you want to sort of get more variance, then you should pair them.
Very interesting.
Idea. Yeah.
Very, very.
Or if you want to decrease variance, choose the kicker that you're opposing your opponent's league mate's quarterback.
Oh yeah, that's another. That would be
the other way to look at it.
Yeah. Wow, that's very interesting. All right, let's talk about the fantasy playoffs real quick, because obviously that's the time of year and that's where we're at right now. You have these tools. Is there any defense out there or defenses out there that you think could crush over the next few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I pointed out, what was it, like my week 10 post or something was called Texans Hold'em, and I think that still holds true. But yeah, you alluded to the tool that, I mean, this is one of the things that was, I'm so glad that this was like a year, I don't know if people realize, of just releasing a lot of stuff for me. I was able to have a lot more time, in this like pairing tool for DSTs was one of them. I hope people got good use out of it who are subscribers, but it lets you actually more easily see the ones that are nice to pair. So yeah, for sure, Texans is obvious. I'm looking at it here. So, the best ones for the playoffs, I would say, is them. There's been some debate about the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs are a good pick as well. People are worried I can hear that if they don't make playoffs, then like, will they give up? I don't see that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those narratives are generally a little bit overrated. Like I think it's sort of a selection bias where like we see it happen maybe once a year with like a certain player or something like that. My general stance is that these guys are NFL athletes. They want to play. This is their literal job, and maybe where I get nervous is when there's a player on a team that's out of it and that individual player gets hurt. Like I've been nervous about like Garrett Wilson, for instance. He gets injured and he's out, and he could maybe hypothetically come back, but he probably won't come back until he's totally 100%. Whereas, if there's a team that's in the play that's competing to get in the playoffs, if he's 80%, he might go out there and play, and that would still be more valuable for your fantasy team than someone else that you'd be replacing him with. So that's kind of my stance, is that like I don't know if teams like really just give up, and you have to, there's 11 players on the field on a team, and like like you have to collectively give up, like this isn't, it's like if one dude like, isn't playing at his 100% and his full strength, like that means that other guys have to, and yeah, that might impact things a little bit, especially if it's like a quarterback, but I think quarterbacks in particular have too big of egos to do that too. So I'm just not, I don't know. I try not to let that over, because I think it's very easy to like, in those instances where we have these narratives, we have these thoughts, to let it overshadow and almost take over what's rational, right? You can think about it, and I think it's fine to say like this might happen, but when you start to do that, you start to then let that overtake any sort of rational thought that you have about that particular team, and that in this case, that defense.
Right. It's again this idea of questioning what you believed. Is that my view on it, and then going with that. Yeah. So Chiefs and Saints and Giants both have great schedules. They're great ones to hold. If you can only hold one DST, of course, at this stage of year, the stashing idea is for sure strategy. So hold the. If you looked ahead on, you would have the Eagles this week, probably. Maybe you got the Bills next week, for example. Yeah. And then after that, Steelers and Lions, and in week 17. So you could stash all of those and make a big DST pie or whatever. But it does.
Yeah. I found that because people just kind of want a golden key for the fantasy playoffs, and they're like, "Hey, give me a defense that I can just play." And I'm like, but why limit yourself? Like why do that when there's probably going to be some defense available that can be better than that one defense for that week?
You can probably get them, or at least you might want to block your opponent from getting them. That's really the angle on that.
Are there any kickers in the fantasy playoffs that people should be interested in?
Yeah, so I've done a whole playoffs thing as well for them. It's some of the obvious, probably their own, but I've been talking Myers and Fairbairn if he's healthy, and Aubrey. Those are like the obvious ones. If you find yourself streaming, I think it's interesting with Bates, actually. People are pretty down on Bates because of the whole fourth down thing. There was, I know like 2-3 years ago or whatever, the Lions were especially, their kickers were suffering because of the whole fourth down thing. But that hasn't played out. Like since their bye week, they've averaged like 9.5 points, I think, or something. Like they've been Bates has had like some 6-point weeks, but a lot of 12, 15-point weeks as well. So I still, people say, why do the rankers keep putting them that high when they go for fourth downs? But I think it's a good pickup. Otherwise, Little and McPherson.
Yeah.
Now that I'm glad to, because I've been down on him for some weeks, and to the ire of some people. But
I mean, he's now that Burrow's back too. You got. I'll be totally honest with you. I'm to the point with kickers where I don't even know starting kickers when the season starts. Like there are guys where I literally am learning who the kickers are, because it's just been, but you know what, this conversation and other conversations, I'll make it my 2026 resolution to get better with kickers.
I don't even look at them on. I mean, a lot of people do go with the name, like, right, you'll draft an Aubrey, and that's great. Sure. You should do that. But people were really surprised when I said pick up Schrader at week 1, and he turned out, to be an amazing pick. That same thing happened a few years ago when people were down on Nick Folk. I can't remember exactly which year, but it had, but you can still. That's why I don't always need to look at the specific kicker and his name and everything. Right. It's what is the situation around him? What is the, is there a new quarterback in town? Like uncertainty at the quarterback position, that's been I've been really big recently on looking at other kicker drivers, and that turns out to be an interesting one as well. There's
is that due to the fact of the team not maybe having confidence in that quarterback and then just going?
I think so, or just not knowing. Like what I found, I tested this because I realized that I rarely had a good accuracy week with kicker and quarterback at the same time. Like I thought, could they actually be related? Like, and then I looked at, and I actually model the likely variance of quarterback outcomes, and I actually test, and that seems to be actually a significant input.
Very interesting.
The wider range of outcomes that a quarterback can have, that helps the kicker, apparently.
Interesting.
So, these are some of the directions I keep trying to poke and push and prod.
It's very cool. All right, before I let you go, I want to hear a bold prediction that you have. I do this with every Perspectives guest. So give me a bold prediction for week 15.
Yeah, I think I got to go with one that's kicker or DST, right?
There we go. Okay, that's fair.
I know. One thing we didn't get to mention, just as a quick segue here, or side note, is um, an interesting study that I did was looking, and when do kickers score these like 20-point blow
Oh
up
yeah.
games,
Yeah.
right? Like when does that happen? Because that's really frustrating as a user, like why did the rankers miss that? I mean, it's like 22 points. How did they not see that coming?
Yeah.
And one kind of satisfying conclusion I got to, I think I'm still working on this one, is like they happen to usually be those like big point games, when the team is expected to lose. So normally in your right mind as a ranker, you wouldn't in your right mind put that kicker like in the top half. I mean, maybe you would, but it and then you can still get, of course, 15 plus point games from if they're expected to win. But like those big games often seem to come from the lower ones. So for this week, I'm gonna go on a limb because you asked me to, and say Rijkaard. Maybe I think he's
Okay.
the one that might have the blow up game. I mean, it depends so much on McCarthy, but
Yeah. I
with the
like it.
uncertainty there, maybe he's the one that blows up this week.
I like it.
And then at DST, I think there's a narrative here with the Ravens and what's going on with them. I'll say that they have a chance to get some defensive touchdowns again. They get a rematch with the Bengals, which
Yep.
has been giving up, by the way, some defensive touchdowns. And maybe they know their number at this point. And with only a 20 something percent chance for the playoffs, they've definitely got something to play for. So maybe a defensive touchdown for the Ravens.
I like that call. And I remember there being in the DFS world like a decade ago, there was a lot of talk about, and I haven't studied this and researched this in detail. Maybe you have, maybe not, but this is something that we both can look at if we haven't. The second time a divisional rival plays each other in season, it's typically a lower scoring, just not as fantasy friendly type of performance.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I haven't looked into it, but it always comes up that people say, "Oh, look at what happened last time."
Right.
McPherson scored 24 points, and it's like, well, but that's not going to happen again. I mean, now they've got to see each other, and it's not something that repeats. There is something's got to change.
Yeah.
So I think it's super interesting. I have not analyzed that yet, but I would.
Yeah, I want to dig into it too, because I don't know why I haven't, because it's been in my head for years now. I just haven't sat down to, because it's one of those like very micro things that may or may not even like yield much, but at this point in the data availability and the ease and kind of analyzing that kind of thing, I do think that it could be interesting.
I spend my time on all that kind of stuff. Are they going to kick more in an international game? Do tight ends score lower after a Monday game? Like whatever, like little micro advantages you can get like that.
That's awesome. That's what makes you, man. That's why you've been crushing it. This has been such an awesome conversation. I think people are going to really dig it. Shout out Reddit. Shout out all the people over there. They get a bad rap over there. There's a lot of people in the fantasy space that don't like to get in the Reddit streets. But I'll say this: it's no different on any other social media platform. It's just that's just the way that it is. I think that if you come with good energy, you'll get good energy back, is my general vibe. Sometimes I can be unnecessarily rude, and I don't mean to, but if I see that I am, then someone responds back and I probably deserved it.
It's such a mix. I am so thankful to the Reddit community. I mean, there have been so many people who really dig this stuff, and they want to get these like rational answers and want to know the analysis and everything. And they have supported over the years. I mean, like I said, I would have stopped if it didn't sort of trigger that interest continually. There was, of course, the other side as well, the toxicity and stuff. That was one of the things where I was like, okay, but the mods have done, I think, an excellent job. That has toned down a lot. They keep it a much better place to be. It's I continually look forward to feedback. Every bit of criticism that I've got, I try to, well, first I ask if it makes any sense at all, and then take it to heart and see if I can improve things. And I think that's what it's about.
I've always said, speaking of the criticism thing, I've always said with Reddit, the thing that I love about it is that when people maybe say something negative about me, which is going to be frequent because, I'm publishing content and I'm putting myself out there and, people are going to get things wrong based on the things that I say. That's just part of the game. That's just part of what this is. And, the goal is that we're transparent. And like I said, everything at the top, just to bring it all back together. The hope is that, people are understanding. But the thing that I've always said about Reddit that I love is that when I'm on Twitter, for instance, the other big sort of like big fantasy football platform, if you will. Obviously, there's now TikTok and stuff, but like the place where people use words to speak to one another and writing. The difference is that on Twitter, when people are going to criticize me, they'll do it where they're actually mentioning me and adding me, right? So that I see it in my mentions, and they're trying to troll in a way. The difference is that very rarely am I actually getting tagged on Reddit. And so I can see what people are saying about me. And I use, like, I'll go through, maybe once a week just to see kind of like what the temperature is about the content that I'm doing and stuff, and seeing if people are talking about it. Not because like I need an ego boost. I'm trying to get better at what I'm doing. And if someone is saying, hey, I don't like the way that this is being presented, or but they're doing it without tagging me. Right. And so they're not doing it to get under my skin. They're doing it because they genuinely believe that thing, and I think that's more powerful to get better as an analyst and to get better as a presenter of information on podcasts and stuff than it is when someone's just trying to get under your skin, by saying that you're this or that and tagging you in it. And I just want to say, like it's great that Reddit has now connected us, and that you were able to get your voice out there via Reddit, because it's brilliant and you're doing amazing stuff. And I got to give Reddit and then the people of Reddit and the community just a lot of props for, like giving multiple people platforms. Like, if there's good work, they're recognizing that good work. And it's great to see someone like you or someone like Andrew Cooper or whomever really come out of there and be able to spread gospel about what they're creating in the fantasy space to more and more people.
That's right. No, I think it's been wonderful. I do have to combine my rankings with some of the OC, the content that I put out there sometimes, because it does tend to draw people that just want. So that was a trick I had to learn a while ago. Like if I just put out the study like I did yesterday, should you pair your DST against the other players? Like, I think the visibility would have been extremely low on that. Reddit has changed a lot in recent years. People use it almost like Twitter, like, so they just read the headline and on that, like they just want, like, and that's been the most frustrating part, I think, recently for me, is that, you get like Bucky Irving was seen at practice on Wednesday, and it's like, is that, and this would be like 1,000 upvotes thing, like for such a low effort. And then I got this 10 hours of analysis and it's like, so that,
but don't stop. It's important to not stop doing that based on that reaction, it's like, I say all the time, like I do this, I'm very thankful that I can now do this and support my family and all of that kind of stuff. But like, this has been completely drawn from passion. And it's never going to go away. And if you hear me get excited on the podcast and my voice gets high and it's because I love this stuff. And you wouldn't want me to not love this stuff, because then you're not getting, the fantasy content that I think you deserve,
Exactly.
And that to me is what's really, really important.
I too have a tendency to get carried away. I don't know if my voice goes high or whatever, but
my voice definitely does.
I definitely write too much sometime. And I think actually the thing I need to, and I'm starting to get better at, is simplifying the things, making it contextualized to sort of really simplify and get the message, because that's what's important to me, is really getting people to get that feeling like, I get it. I got that insight now. And I think that's what you're really into too. And that's rewarding. And it's this like empowerment, like, okay, I know how to play the game now.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, from my perspective, and I know that we're kind of just rambling and talking about random stuff right now, but hopefully people are digging it. But like, to me, it's like, it's so cool that we get to kind of go in this lab and figure stuff out that has not been studied or researched or figured out. And then you're so vulnerable in putting it out there. And I'm not saying, when I say so vulnerable, I know it's just fantasy football, guys. I know that this is not like life or death, but it's one of the, like, you're open for criticism because you're putting yourself out there and you've researched all this stuff and you think you have this great idea. And sometimes it goes really south and, sometimes it goes really, really well. But that's so cool. It's just such a cool thing to be able to do and to be able to have that platform. And it's important. And again, I'm going to stress this, like, it's very easy to be defeated in seeing a thread bro on Twitter, putting some garbage stuff together, or, seeing the upvotes for like a really, easy, low hanging fruit post on Reddit. But I do think that it is important to have voices in this space that are doing really, really good work. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're absolutely crushing.
And it really helps to have their input as well. Like when I mean, a lot of the studies are just inspired by somebody like saying they know something or they have this
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
The one I got the biggest, you mentioned the backlash. I think one of the most controversial ones I put was if a kicker has multiple double digit weeks, they score 10, 12, 15, whatever,
Yeah.
then they're going to score double digit the following week as well. So I just pulled out data and said, look, it basically the attrition rate is half. So like, there's like a 50-50 chance at any point along a streak that they're going to drop out.
Yeah.
And that somehow that was probably one of the most like angry sounding responses.
That's
People,
funny.
I think, who was it, Myers at the time or someone that they really wanted to believe it was going to continue. But
Yeah.
Anyway, but it's just about, I don't regret that. I think that's actually, it was a wonderful take. And I think, a lot of people really dug what was behind that. And
yeah, we should be, that's what this is about, man. We're having like, it's important to have conversations with people. And that's why when like people are like, just ignore people who are criticizing your work or whatever. It's like, no, I want to just converse with people. I just want to have conversations and get better at what I'm doing. If someone's saying something negative about what's going on, I want to know why that's the case. And then I want to dig into the why and see like, oh, is there a blind spot in my analysis that I can get better? Because I want to be good at this. I want to be able to give good advice and have people listen and keep coming back because the conversations in these relationships are just so important. But
and like your strategy, it feels so much better to play when you know what's going on. Like, I sorry if I'm just dragging this out, but I did, another one I just completed recently. Again, I repeated was, do quarterbacks throw more in garbage time or whatever, like if their defense is bad?
Right.
And that was been an assumption for a long time. Like, oh, you pick them, their D's bad, they got to keep up with the game. And it turns out, no, there's actually no basis when you divide it up. And I think that's just like super interesting.
Yes. Especially because like that's the way like, and people, the other thing to that, again, we are rambling, but the other thing to that is that when we have these narratives, we then attribute those narratives to why things go down the way they go down without actually attributing it to the actual quarterback performance. Right. So like, Dak Prescott playing on Dallas this year, everyone's like, oh, this is the Bengals of 2025, right? Because the Bengals last year had that horrible defense, but realistically, you need a really good quarterback to be in that position more than likely to be able to actually like take advantage of that. It can't just be any old guy that's going to be in these negative game scripts to be able to perform in that way. They still need to be good and efficient, and so like, You're saying, oh, Joe Burrow was good because he had that bad defense. So like you still have to be a good quarterback to be able to do what he's doing from a numbers perspective,
Yeah, exactly. And it's not correlated necessarily with the defense. It is, however, interestingly, and because you can do that with the data, actually divide it up, it is correlated with the opposing offensive power. So actually that
makes
actually
sense. High game totals and all that kind of stuff.
So the idea of a shootout or whatever, that's valid.
Yeah. Man, this was great. Let everyone know where they can find you and the things that you're working on and what they can look forward to.
Yeah, I'm going to keep up fighting the good fight. And there's, like you said, no stopping it. It's too interesting stuff and there's a lot more to come. So I'm really excited also for next year. This has been one of the best years, I think. It's going to be hard to top, but keep trying.
Yeah, you got to stay ahead. So subvertadown.com, right?
Subvertadown.com, yes.
Yeah. Awesome, man. I really appreciate it. As always, you guys can check out my stuff, lateround.com. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@lateroundff. But otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.